But the thing about blockchain adoption is the whole reason for adopting it is it's going to make our lives better. And our lives are off-chain, basically. All of the benefits and a lot of the problems for blockchain adoption are not directly on-chain, they're in our lives.
Hello and welcome to the Blockchain Pro podcast. I'm Adriana and today I'm chatting to Mark Staples about what he identifies as the 3 blockchain adoption paradoxes. Mark is a senior principal researcher at Data61 and CTO at the newly formed Digital Finance CRC. Let's get to know Mark. This episode was recorded in Gadigal land, where I live and work. I acknowledge their people's connection to the land and their traditions, and pay my respects to the elders past, present, and emerging. Hi, Mark.
Hi. How are you doing?
How are you?
Good.
Thanks for meeting me today. Let's jump right in and talk about how did you fall down the path of research?
Right, research. So I'm a second-generation computer scientist. So my father was a professor of computer science, so doing research. So I guess that's part of it. My undergraduate was in computer science at University of Queensland. I didn't really know what I wanted to do afterwards, but then I got an opportunity to go overseas, go to Cambridge and to do a PhD, which was also in computer science. So that was kind of research training in sort of fairly theoretical computer science. But then when I came back to Australia, I moved back to industry, and so I worked for a few different companies doing software and systems engineering, and that's really where I learned about software engineering, not computer science. And but then in 2004, there was an organisation formed, like a new research institute called NICTA, National ICT Australia, which was a government-funded research organisation in computing. And that was a great opportunity to get back into research. So I've always enjoyed research for learning about new things and also trying to dig into problems and understand them, tease them apart and understand how to sort of tackle them in a simple way. So, research is great for that. So and then I'm doing research in NICTA since then, and then since then NICTA's been acquired by CSIRO, and so I'm now in Data61, which is the sort of data and digital part research arm of CSIRO, which is the Australia's national research, science and technology research agency.
And how did blockchain came into play for you and the research that you do?
When I joined NICTA, I was doing research in software engineering and software architecture, and then probably around 2015, and it was around the time that Ethereum was getting going, there was this sort of new opportunity to use blockchains as a component in the development of software systems. And so our research group started looking at that. So our research group has always taken this sort of focus on blockchain research. We've looked at blockchain as one of the components in the development of broader systems, because a blockchain's never just the whole system by itself. So at the very least, there's always key management, which happens off-chain, but usually there's a lot of other stuff that happens off-chain to oracles and integration with other systems and so on. We got into that. We looked at things like how you could use blockchain to do for example, business process coordination across multiple different companies or organizations. And we looked at things like design trade-offs in the use of blockchain for different parts of a overall system. So those kind of research topics in blockchain. And how
that research help inform both government and industry in the applications for blockchain?
So I guess the kind of research we're doing was probably a good fit for people like government and industry. They don't want to develop their own blockchains. They want to know how to use blockchain, and that's what our research was about. But also CSIRO, it's kind of vendor neutral, technology neutral, and also trusted by government and industry in Australia. So so we're in a good position to help people as they're working through understanding blockchain, how it can be used, when it should be used, when it shouldn't.
One of the examples of that is the National Blockchain Roadmap that comes to mind.
Yeah. Probably, so to start with, I think 2017, maybe 16, 17, we did a couple of reports for the Federal Australian Government Treasury. So they were sort of public reports published then about, risks and opportunities with using blockchain and sort of future prospects of blockchain. And then we've been involved with various companies and government projects, since then. But yeah, the National Blockchain Roadmap was disrupted my sense of time. I think it's recently, but it's been a little while ago now, a couple of years ago, I guess.
Yeah, I think it started maybe in 2019, and then we published the first report in 2020.
Yeah.
And it rolled from there.
So we were both on the kind of steering committee and advising into that process. And yeah, the government published those reports. And then they had those 2 pilot projects as well, which were awarded. So I think they must be finishing soon.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, stay tuned. We'll talk about that at a future episode, probably. Okay. So last year, when we ran into each other, you told me about the 3 blockchain adoption paradoxes.
Yeah. I was on a panel end of last year, I think in an IEEE conference, research conference. And so I had these kind of 3, what I call blockchain adoption paradoxes, and they're not really kind of logical paradoxes, but they're sort of things that I see as kind of constantly being issues in blockchain adoption.
Yes, let's break them down. Okay. They're very interesting.
Yeah. So the first paradox, I say it's more transparency, but not about me. One of the great things about blockchain is everyone can see it, especially the public blockchains, and everyone can cross-check all the integrity of all the data on the blockchain. And that lets sort of third parties just independently check the status of transactions and stuff. And that's great for transparency. And the other interesting thing is, for example, Bitcoin, when it was developed, it relied on these pseudonymous addresses to sort of hide the identities of the parties. But now, probably, especially with public blockchains, the biggest anxiety of people like regulators is that they're too private. These pseudonymous addresses let people hide, and there might be, money laundering or other bad stuff like that. But the sort of fundamental transparency of blockchain means that blockchains are often too transparent. They're not private enough for many business use cases. So a lot of businesses want to have commercial and confidence information. They have to handle private information. And so these public blockchains are usually not private enough for many business use cases. And even the so-called private blockchains, they're not usually private enough either, because even on a private blockchain, the whole point of using a blockchain is having multiple organizations work together. So even if they set up their own little walled garden, it's probably still going to be sharing information perhaps with their competitors or people that they want to have, protect information from. So fundamentally, I think this is it's not really a problem with blockchain. It's kind of a problem with business models. It's like an information security policy model. What information should people be able to see? Some people want more transparency about business processes, and some people want to protect their information. So blockchain doesn't sort of cause this problem, but it does really bring it to the fore. When you're developing blockchain-based systems, is really trying to resolve that design challenge. It's a requirements problem about the business model.
And it's interesting because from a business point of view, you have to keep a lot of things private. Yeah. But from the individual point of view, you do as well, right? Because when Bitcoin first came about, there was no centralized exchanges, and there was no know your customer or KYC policies involved, and people could really anonymously transact between each other. Yeah. But nowadays, in order to access Bitcoin, in many cases, you first have to go through one of those entry points where your identity is recorded, and many people are, especially with governments considering the adoption of central bank digital currencies, considering how are we going to still keep our privacy. Have you done any research in regards to that?
Yeah, so I think privacy means different things to different people. So a lot of the sort of public blockchain have this idea that privacy means that no one else gets to see my information unless I personally let them. But that's not what governments think privacy is. The government view of privacy is, sure, but we can also find out who you are, because sometimes they need to fight crime or stop bad stuff from happening, from terrorism or so on. I think the current approach where you have, in Australia, as you said, for example, we have these KYC processes for the cryptocurrency exchanges. But then after that, it can be harder to track identity online, although, for example, the public ledgers do give you a sort of permanent open record of all the transactions, and they have been used to sort of hunt down people and financial flows in criminal investigations. So I don't know what the right answer is. It's a kind of policy question.
Oh, no. It's not about the right or wrong answer. It's just about talking about the issues that are current to the people who listen to this, because I guess most of us wonder about these things, right? And it's important to just have this discussion.
And hugely topical now with the sanctions stuff as well. And there's a lot of concern about can sanctions be evaded through the use of cryptocurrency and so on. All I can go by is reading the newspaper, which apparently seems to not be a problem at the moment, but it's certainly something people are keeping an eye on.
I think as long as the eye is being kept on,
maybe.
It's probably harder for them to use crypto to evade those sanctions, because you can track all the addresses and if we know. But anyway, we digress. Let's talk about the adoption paradox too.
Right, the second one. So the second one is, I call it, consensus does not give you agreement. What I mean by that is, sure, blockchain consensus mechanisms, they give you some kind of agreement about transactions, which transactions are on the ledger. But for blockchain adoption, the hardest thing is getting people to agree to adopt it in the first place. And particularly I'm thinking for these sort of consortium blockchains that are often proposed to be used in industry settings. So I guess one of the challenges is in conventional IT, every company buys their own IT, and then that cost is hopefully leading directly to a productivity gain for them, and that's the sort of return on their investment. But with decentralized IT, there's no single owner of this central IT. Everyone's spending money, but who's getting the return is sometimes a bit less clear, and sometimes some people might spend, but other people might get more of a benefit. Even if it lowers costs for everyone overall, someone's perhaps going to get more of an advantage. Sometimes the sort of relative advantage is what's important in competition, not the absolute sort of cost saving. So, getting agreement to adopt in the first place is hard. And, so I mentioned that investment thing, but also that first problem about who should see what information, that's also kind of related to this as well, because everyone needs to agree what information should be visible to who, when, and if people are becoming more transparent, then they're worried that perhaps information becomes available to their competitors. So getting everyone to agree to use a new system is just hard. Sometimes I say IT governance for blockchains, it's more like international diplomacy than like IT management.
That makes sense.
Like you get everyone in the room and talk about it.
I guess one point about the gamification aspect of crypto plays a part in here, where you make the investment if it's for your own benefit and the benefit of the whole ecosystem. As it grows, it will benefit everybody and you yourself as well.
Yeah, right.
And one thing that I like about the open nature of this is that if I have the means, I can put in the hardware. But if I don't have the means, I can still participate, which is very inclusive.
By sort of contributing to the community or in other ways.
In any other way you can.
Yeah, but they're all different sorts of investment. Your time's worth money, was valuable to you. Everyone's investing in different ways. But it's still the same thing. You're going to invest in the community, perhaps in non-monetary ways, but maybe you get monetary reward out of that, or maybe you get sort of community benefits out of that as well. Yeah, and I guess personal motivations are a little different, perhaps sometimes to companies tend to be more sort of, financially driven, whereas people have perhaps broader drivers. But even so, I guess the whole rise of this, ESG, environmental social governance thing is perhaps giving companies broader drivers as well.
Always interesting to think about these things. All right, paradox number 3.
Right. So the third one is the future of blockchain adoption is off-chain.
Okay, that's a big call.
And I think when people talk about blockchain, they usually focus on the platform details. It doesn't happen so much now, but you used to have a few years ago, we'd have these sort of, what is blockchain? And every blockchain meeting would start by trying to describe blockchains, and they would dive into these technical mechanisms about consensus and ledger structures and hashing and encryption and so on. And that's, I think, still what most academic research focuses on as well, is the blockchain as a platform itself. But the thing about blockchain adoption is the whole reason for adopting it is it's going to make other things, our lives better. And our lives are off-chain, basically. All of the benefits and a lot of the problems for blockchain adoption are not directly on-chain, they're in our lives. So that's what I mean by here is all of the business model challenges, the governance of blockchain, all of that's off-chain. These problems about, what we call parity problems, what's recorded on-chain, does it reflect what actually is happening off-chain as well? So there's digital or physical parity problem. Like if I'm using blockchain to track things in a supply chain, is the sort of the token I have on the blockchain, does that actually correspond to where the goods physically are? That's an off-chain thing. But also the legal issues as well. If I have some record on a register of an NFT for some piece of art, does that mean I own the legal copyright to that or not? What decides that is not on-chain. It's an off-chain thing that decides that question. Yeah, there's a lot of these issues are off-chain issues, and trying to understand what the blockchain record means is all about understanding what it means in terms of, the rest of the world. So there's these off-chain issues. And these days as well, we see a lot of the innovation is in layer 2 space. And that's all off-chain. Or it might be on another chain, but it's still from the point of view of the main chain, off-chain. Yeah, so that's what I mean. The future of blockchain adoption is off-chain because really what we're understanding is how to use blockchain to solve other problems that matter to us.
And for the new person listening to this, perhaps it's their first episode.
Yeah.
What is a good resource for them to go about the first steps?
You like this answer. I think probably one of the best resources are things like meetups, and your organised meetups. They're great, and that's how I just go along to meetups and listen. And I still go along to meetups and listen. I learn things, and the meetups vary. Some of them are just very introductory, and you can meet people and talk to them. And then there are other meetups that dive into quite technical details as well. And I think that's one of the great things about COVID is, if there are great things about COVID, is a lot of these things have gone online. And so there's a lot of either fully virtual or hybrid things. So you can see a lot more of this stuff online as well.
Yeah, COVID interrupted our lives, but it didn't stop them, right? We just had to adapt.
Yeah, real change.
And we did do a lot of online meetups last year. I have a YouTube channel as well, where this podcast is on and the meetups are on. So that would not have happened if we didn't have COVID. Right. So, All right, here we get to. So, are we done with the paradoxes? Were there only 3?
That's it. Those 3. There's probably more, but
3 so far that you've uncovered.
3's good for a panel, which is what I was talking about. So.
All right, so let's talk a bit about your quick 3. Quick 3 questions are. What are you currently reading, Mark?
It's a book by one of my favourite authors, Donald Mackenzie. He's a professor of sociology at the University of Edinburgh. And he wrote a book earlier called Mechanising Proof, which was like a sociologist's view on the intellectual history of interactive theorem proving and formal verification of software. And I love that because it was kind of about, my field at the time and the people I knew were sort of actors in the history, so that was great. But he's written this other book, and this one's called An Engine, Not a Camera, How Financial Models Shape Markets. And so he's doing the same kind of thing. It's an intellectual history of options pricing theory and so on. So more interesting perhaps than it sounds. But it's not just the sort of dry intellectual history, it's the sort of stories about how the individuals moved around and influenced, markets and created new systems and so on. So, it's a great book.
As we evolve to a life of many markets, might be like recommended reading for everyone.
So I got into that because I'm my most recent thing is this year I'm seconded in as the Chief Technology Officer for a new research centre called the Digital Finance Cooperative Research Centre.
All right.
That's getting going. It's a 10-year research centre looking at creating digital assets to enable, or how digital assets can enable trading in new kinds of assets that are previously, illiquid or not traded. And so partly I was looking around for books to kind of help me understand finance a bit more and discovered this one. So that's why
I'm going to read that too.
Yeah.
It's not my forte, I admit it. Do you want to, just before we move on to the second quick question, what is about this new position?
So it's a new cooperative research centre. So the CRCs or cooperative research centres are a program that governments run for decades now where industry and universities get together to set up research institutes for some limited time to do research in some new area. And this middle of last year, the Digital Finance Cooperative Research Centre proposal got approved and is starting operation this year. So just getting going. There'll be some launch event, I think, soon. So I won't try and steal their thunder. But it's not private; it's sort of public information that it's starting. And yeah, I'm seconded in as the Chief Technology Officer. So trying to not necessarily doing all the technology stuff myself, but try to coordinate across the various kind of research projects and activities in that centre.
That sounds like a really interesting project to be involved in.
Yeah, and it brings together, law, finance, and computer science from a sort of research point of view. And then it brings a whole lot of other industry and government agencies as well participating in various ways. Yeah, it's great. And
probably blockchain is going to be a big part of all that is researched in there.
That's right. It's not necessarily blockchain and distributed ledger, but some of it will be for sure.
Yeah, when you talk law, finance, and computer science, that's like three areas that can be heavily influenced by blockchain tech and how it evolves, right?
Yeah.
All right, so quick question number 2. What is your favorite crypto resource?
So I think I'm going to say meetups again. Yeah, just the best way to learn about stuff. I guess the other thing is Google Scholar. If you've ever think you've had some idea, you kind of Google it and find that someone else has often had it before you. And so you don't want to have to repeat all the work they've done. And Google Scholar, as a researcher, gives you can find a lot of relevant papers to any sort of topic that you're looking for. So meetups for sort of just learning about new stuff and meeting people. And then if I have a particular technical thing, then I'll start looking at the literature. Yeah.
Okay, Google Scholar for research papers, not blockchain white papers.
Yeah, I mean, some of the blockchain white papers appear in Google Scholar.
Do they?
Yeah. If they end up getting cited in the literature, then they'll get drawn into that. I'm not sure where they draw the line, but
maybe in the peer review. I'm not sure how that works.
White papers don't get peer reviewed, so Google Scholar has a kind of broader. Anyway, I'm not sure, but yeah, white papers are often good as well to look at.
Meetups and white papers.
Meetups and the literature.
In general.
Yeah.
Good. All right. And quick question number 3. What's your favorite project?
I've always had a soft spot for Ethereum, I guess. It sort of was a game changer early on and still forging ahead doing new great stuff. I also like the whole DAML language as well. That seems quite well designed and interesting. Yeah, it's hard to pin down a single favorite, but I like these projects where they're pushed forward or are still pushing forward on some new kind of computer science approach, and particularly around building systems. And my
favorite tool is I think it was made by Data61.
Oh, right.
The ETHViewer.
ETHViewer.live. Yeah.
Yes, that is such a great tool for beginners to understand how a blockchain works, right?
Yeah. Because you can watch like Ethereum transactions happening live, and it's like you can see a block happening, and you can just stare at it for hours. And it shows you the uncle blocks as well. And you get to see all the little transactions, the little bubbles that how big they are depends on their size. And you can see some are smart contracts and some are just crypto transfers. So you can see all those kind of things happening. Yeah, it's a great thing for beginners, but also it makes a lot of things real. Like you can see the interblock times varying over time. And there's also a view that shows you the influence of gas price on transaction inclusion times and so on. So there's lots of kind of more sophisticated issues you can see through that tool. Yeah.
And they are pretty fun to watch.
Yeah, that's right.
This is it. We made it. How can people connect with you?
That's an interesting question. Go to a meetup or email as well.
All right. Thank you, Mark.
Okay, great. Thanks.
And that was Mark Staples. You can connect with Mark at a meetup or shoot him an email. Just ping me on socials and I'll facilitate that connection for you. Hope you enjoyed this episode. Do you agree with Mark's blockchain adoption paradoxes? Have you identified a fourth one? Let us know in the description. We'd love to hear your comments. That's it for today's episode. Be well, stay safe, and dry if possible. I'll see you on the next block. Bye!